So here are a few memories, videos of my transition, going from one look to another. I feel like this kind of just shows, the maturity that I was coming from. Sometimes God works in your life to where um, he puts you in certain situations because to get to you he has to get through you. So it's like that shell. I was in this shell, this cocoon, and I just didn't want to come out. And that's how I feel. It's hard to really open your eyes when you're so comfortable. Especially, it's not even about comfort. It's more so about um, you wanting to be safe. You playing it safe, and you're really fearful because you've gone so long in this shell. And it comes to a point where you have no other choice but to break free. So, I started off, with the wig, with the makeup, the jewelry, everything. Not really jewelry. The only jewelry that I really had was earrings, but more so of, the makeup, the wig. I don't see nothing wrong with makeup because it's natural. It's something that we created, handmade from, natural stuff as well as other stuff. We don't know all the nitty gritties about makeup. But it took me forever. It took me a while to really accept myself for who I really was. Because honestly, I didn't know who I was. I don't know who is under this makeup. Like, I got a sneak peek every now and then, at nighttime to morning time. It was the only time you really fast from your makeup. So, yeah, I didn't know. But I didn't start to realize, I didn't start to wake up to myself until it wasn't even about me getting tired of putting on the makeup, because painting this makeup on was an expression of me creating. I had the feel of always wanting to, express myself. So I did. And I did that with makeup. So I guess I became curious, of myself. It's a lot of traumas that come with it. I was being traumatized, and the more I became traumatized, it's like God was pushing me out. God was pushing me out, and it was so frustrating, and it was aggravating, and I wanted to bawl out my eyes. God was pushing me out, and I didn't want to come out. But it came to a point where the more I stayed, the worse it became. I don't even know how to explain what I went through. Because when it gets to this point, it's like I got to write it down. Because how it sounds is just like, wow, you're crazy. You are crazy, And only I see that, and every time I see what I went through, it happens. It keeps happening, And this is how I know, God just keeps pushing me and pushing me and pulling me and pulling me. And it becomes so frustrating. I would be in my wig and I wouldn't feel like myself in that wig anymore. I would look in the mirror and be like, who is this person? I felt suffocated. I started feeling, my head I felt like I needed to get this thing off of my head. This is uncomfortable, I started seeing myself through other people without the wigs. Honestly. Like, this is who you could be. But you're not out of the wig. I started seeing myself, seeing my face on other people. And who I seen in that mirror was just a vessel. I didn't know who I was. So I was like, you know what? I got to take it off. And I took it off. And I just kept putting the positives. I had to keep saying, oh, yeah, so if it's not so great, so I have to make it to where I will feel okay. And so I did. So I took off the wig, and
what's this?
I just kept seeing the light, And that's what I'm saying. A lot of other people can also be your light. And that's how other people was for me. It's like God kept giving me that perception, Look at this person, and try to figure it out from here. So I tried to, and I just literally just told my sons that don't try, do it, because if it's a feeling, then you're going based off of that feeling. There's no need to try if you actually feel a certain way. If you feel a certain way, it's beyond your control. And that's how I was, I felt a certain way and I reacted, and I just tried to make it work. I didn't shelter myself. And that's the thing about having kids. You can't shelter yourself, and as much as you want to, just like that bird, trapping itself inside of a tree. That's how I want it, you know? I'm like, can I just trap myself inside this house and close all the windows and come out when I'm ready to come out? Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. You know, being a mother, we have to do what we have to do. And as many times as I was like, you know, I'm staying for the whole day, something pulled me out. Something pulled me out. It was always this. It was always that. It was always something, you know, and I had to come out. I had to come out just as I was. But the more I came out, the more courageous I became. The more ideas came to me, you know, and eventually I walked out and I have no problem with the way I came out anymore. So the more I became comfortable without the wigs, the more I became more in tune with myself, to where, you know what, I started stripping off the makeup, you know. And I think I started this before I decided to come out of the wigs. No, I couldn't have possibly. Actually, I don't even remember, but I think I did though. So I want to not being comfortable with the makeup, and that's the thing. I don't know which came first, the wigs or the makeup. I don't know which one, but it happened for me, and I started becoming uncomfortable with the makeup. You know, the feeling that I got with the makeup was, it wasn't really a feeling. It was more so a look, because the makeup felt good. You know, there was no doubt that the makeup didn't feel good. It was more so of, I got tired of the mess. You know, the mess on my clothes. Every time I put on a scarf or something, or I put something, I lay on somebody's, you know, if I'm dating, I lay on his pillowcases and it's leaving smudges. I didn't want to go through that no more. I just got tired of doing too much, you know, and I just wanted to feel ordinary. You know, I wanted that ordinary look. You know, I didn't care about who I was anymore, who I turned myself into with the wigs and the makeup. I didn't care about that person anymore. It's like breaking out of a shell. Like I said, you get to a point where you outgrow the shell, and it's just like, the shell isn't doing me no justice. And when you're trying to put that shell, it's like you're trying to put that shell back together, piece by piece by piece, to cover you back up after you've broken through it. You can't put it back together once you broke out of it. It becomes exhausting. It's like, mentally, I'm not about to do this, you know, so I just have to deal with it now. You know, once you shed one layer, you become interested in shedding that next layer. And it's just like, who am I now? You know, and the trauma that came with that is, you know, I go out, and wherever I'm going or whatever person I'm with, I felt like they didn't accept me. You know, it's like I was accepted one way until I was accepted another way, and then I wasn't accepted this way, I wasn't accepted that way. And it's just like, this is what was going through my mind. And when you're trying to balance two things, you can't balance them. You know, it's either one or the other. When that teeter-totter, two people on that teeter-totter, one goes down and one goes up. One goes up and one goes down. And I get to this point where I get so frustrated, you know. I'm like, why is it like this for me? Why can't I feel okay? You know? What's going on? What's wrong? What's wrong with me? I got to a point where, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Was all that I could think of. All that came to me. What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? And what's wrong stopped once I stopped. You know, and it took a long time. But every time I shed one layer, it was always something I didn't know. And me being curious, that's what God used my curiosity for. You know, God knew who I was inside, because your shell only reflects who you truly are. You know, this shell, if this shell is so wonderful, you know, this shell is so beautiful, this shell is so vibrant, what's under that shell? I became curious. God knew, but I didn't know. And God had to break through that shell with me so that I can see. So I can see for myself. It's not what's on the outside. It's what's on the inside. And just as you did with that shell on the outside, it was only you. It was you the whole time on the inside. You know? I was in a sauna one time. And I was talking to this guy. And I was telling him, you know, I was like, when I was younger, I wanted to get rid of my mom. And he was like, no, don't do that. Don't get rid of your mom. No matter what he say, if I want to do something, I'm going to do it. But I've got that so many times, you know, but before that, no was a yes, you know, coming from other people. And I told, you know, I expressed it when I was older, just to see what people say, just to get their perspective. You know, their opinion really don't matter. But when I was younger, I wanted to get rid of the mole, because it's rare to actually see a student or see a little girl with a mole on her face. And I got teased a lot about my mole. I'll be called chocolate chip. I would be called so many names. Like, oh, you look like this person just because this person got a mo. I'm like, that mo don't look nothing like my mo. So how do I look like that person just because I got a mo? You know, there were people who be like, I eventually got this thing where I got afraid because I seen this one girl's mo and her mo was huge and she was older than me. I'm like, I wonder if her mo started off as small as mine and then it got big. And then if that is the case, then my mo is going to get huge. And then I was teased about witches having moles and hair out their moles and stuff like that. I wanted to get it removed. But then I remember, I would say junior year, I started accepting my mo. And this was before I even got into makeup. So I started accepting myself, and I accepted my mo because guess what? I found out my bully envied my mo. She didn't have to say anything. Eventually she did say anything. She did start saying something, but it wasn't until I started seeing her, she had a piercing in the same spot. Sometimes your bullies envy what you have. So that was the first light I seen out of my mo. And then later on, I just accepted my mo. That's something you couldn't cover up with the makeup. I couldn't cover up my mo, so that's something I had to accept before I even got into the makeup. So I've been accepting my mo. And then I told him about my freckles, and I was like, yeah, just to see what he'd say. I was like, yeah, I could accept the mo, but at the same time, my freckles being on the same side as my mo, I don't think, I feel like, it's one or the other. So, and then he wound up saying, if anything, I would remove the freckles and, don't keep the mo. Don't do nothing with the mo. I love that mo. You should keep that mo. And that's when that's what I'm saying. That's when I found out right then and there, oh yeah. Even though I had no intention of being with this dude or having anything with this dude, but that just revealed to me right there, you're not the type of man that I like. As soon as I see you trying to change something about me that took so long for me to accept, you got to go. Because I worked so hard on myself that I wouldn't have it any other way. I look at my picture. Anytime I go back to my picture, I'm like, oh, I look at myself as I would look at my daughter. Like, oh my gosh, I was so adorable. Oh my gosh, I was so cute. I was so beautiful. Like that type of mentality, like that type of perspective. I would look at myself like, oh my gosh, aw. But I even, the feeling would overpower the idea of, oh yeah, should I go back to this? Should I go back to that? I don't think twice about going back to a wig. I don't. When it comes to makeup, I can't see myself. Like, I feel like that idea isn't fully let go of. I can see myself going back to makeup. I like the eyeliner, I like the lipstick, but I can see myself going back to foundation, concealer, and stuff like that. Just because I've accepted myself enough, but I just don't want to lose the perception of who I am in the makeup and feel less than because I chose to wear makeup. So I'm still kind of skeptical about that, but yeah, I have, for the simple fact that I feel like that idea still lingers just because I haven't accepted my freckles. So that idea does still linger. But other than that, it wouldn't linger. There's some situations I get into where people start to have, throw their ideas onto me or start throwing their opinion of me onto me. And, I didn't notice this about myself. Now I notice it. Like, what was brought to my attention was about my mo again. This guy said, oh yeah, I like your mo. And then I come to a situation where, oh yeah, your mo was like really big or this and that and third. So this is stuff I still struggle with. It's like my only eyes is on my freckles while everybody else is noticing something that I don't notice. And it's just like, would putting on makeup eliminate all of that when I still have to deal with it at the end of the day? So if I was to put on makeup, it wouldn't be to cover. It would be to, just to, I don't know. It wouldn't be to cover, but it would be out of curiosity, or a mood. I feel like this. I feel like eyeshadow. I feel like lipstick. I feel like eyeliner. I want to feel a different feeling on my face, so I go to foundation or concealer. It would be more of a feeling, more so, but it wouldn't be cover up because I've come too far to just feel like I have to cover up what I've already done. It's like going down, you have that path or that trail. You made a trail or you made this path and you're walking down that path, and then you want to turn around and start, covering up that path, merging that path in with dirt so that you don't see that path anymore. It's kind of like that. You don't want to lose sight of where you came from. Sometimes it could be a good thing, because it's a lot of stuff, sometimes that's you letting go, but at the same time, it's just that it's a lot of lessons and stuff that you learned along the way, and that path would just, if you really completely just let go of that path, it's like starting all over again. I don't want to start all over again. I don't want to put myself back in the same situation to where I'm back at square one. I'm this person again with the wig and the makeup and all this other stuff, and I forgot who I am, but it's too late to try to do it all over again. That's the thing about life. We don't have, life is not you know, we don't have a lot of time. So once you break out of the shell and you go back into the shell, now you're dealing with what you should have dealt with. You know, back then you're dealing with that now. And it's like you're on a repeat, you know, you're pressing repeat. And you don't want to repeat what you already been through because you look forward to who you are now. You know, you see progress. So it's not easy breaking away. The transition was hard. It was a very traumatizing experience for me. And it's not getting easier. And that's the only advice I can leave you with, is that it doesn't get easier. You know, so yeah. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Be notified and share at your own free will to show you care.
When I lost my mind, there was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo, and so much